Katie Doyle. I am a graphic designer and illustrator, but not really because I am just graduated, barely worked a job in my life, but here I am. I'm going to talk about design ethics today. We're just going to get into the basics. I'm planning on this being a series of videos where I'll get into more specific topics regarding things like sustainability, accessibility, decolonization of design, stuff like that. Today it's just going to be the basics of just like what are ethics and how do we bring those into our design practice. So let's start off with what are ethics? Ethics are basically just what's good, what's bad. Sounds very simple, but it's like obviously not. There's a whole field looking into what is good and what is bad, and it's the sum of it all is that it's just very subjective. It's really up to you what your ethics are. Another part of ethics that like another definition is you avoid activities or organizations that do harm to people, animals, and or the environment. That is kind of more what we'll be looking at today, in that we're looking at personal ethics and how you apply them. Because, you can have your principles and you can have your values, but if you don't apply them, like what is their purpose, basically? Something I would like, each of you to practice, to basically like get out of this video something would just be to go and write down what are your values, what are your principles, what do you think is good and bad, and that can be relating to design stuff, or it can be relating to just generally the world. What do you think is good? What do you think is bad? And then you will bring that into your design practice, and I'll get into how you will do that. Looking at like personal ethics, we will be getting into what do I think is good and bad, and we can just do that as sort of a case study of how you can apply what you think is good and bad to your design practices and how I would apply them to mine. I think weapons are bad, and I think animals are good. Just like random stuff like that. You can like write down that. So something that I think is bad is capitalism and colonialism, imperialism, and those are things that guide me in my design practices. Obviously not that much that I actually apply because, like I said, I am fresh out of school. I haven't really done much actual design work in the real world, so what do I know? But this is just a practice and, like a thought exercise. If you want any guidance in terms of, like examples of people practicing different design ethics, you can look up design manifestos. You can look up, for example, First Things First Manifesto, which came out in the 60s, and it was basically a group of designers that signed off on this thing by Ken Garland, and he wrote basically that graphic designers are putting their talents to, not proper use, and we should be looking at, helping the world and doing, more culturally significant things than just doing a graphic design, like doing an ad for kitty litter. And then there was also in Adbusters in 2002, I think, a bunch of other designers, they re-signed that and kind of re-put forward the similar things that were said in the initial manifesto. So basically, once you get a whole nice list down of things that you think are good, things that you think are bad, mixed together of design world and not, what do you do with them? How do you apply them? So I have some actions here that you can practice, which I will say are mainly from this book here, The Conscious Creative by Kelly Small, and it's Practical Ethics for Purposeful Work, and it basically just goes through different ways that you can like practice ethics and ethical work in a creative field. Let's get into it. I think the biggest dilemma that graphic designers face in terms of ethics is whether or not you should take certain clients. This is definitely something that I'm very concerned with once I get out into the real world. Because right now, you know, I have like such values, and I'm like, oh, I would never take this client, I wouldn't take that client, and I want to be like so pure ethically. But you know, it's obviously like that's a privilege that I have, that I can probably say no to certain clients. And I'm basically just don't want to be like, oh, don't take these clients and take these clients, and be super like, oh, ethically like great, whatever. I just want to kind of like give you both sides and let you decide for yourself where you want to draw the line in terms of ethics. I just think it's important to be more thoughtful about your design practices, because I think it makes you a better designer. So let's say I have a client, I have Amazon, which I think is like a really, it's like a really kind of like, would I want to do that or not? I personally, like, I don't shop at Amazon because I like to support small businesses, and I don't like the way Amazon treats their employees. But it's a huge client, and that's a lot of money. So there are basically two schools of thought here. One is that you can say no to clients that you think are ethically bad. Like, obviously you don't want to support a company or help, you know, bolster a company that is doing things that you don't agree with. And that is like my reason that I personally am like, oh, I don't want to go into advertising, because, you know, like I could get clients like, you know, like Lockheed Martin and like BP, I don't know, like stuff like that I wouldn't want to support, and I wouldn't want to give a better image to, when, which is what, you know, you're doing with graphic design. You're trying to get people to buy their stuff or like think more agreeably of them. Like, it's obviously not that you're like, you know, working for like a weapons manufacturer and being like, oh no, weapons are bad. Like, it all comes back to like trying to get profit for the company, and that's unfortunately like that's how it is, and that's how we operate, and like that's, you know, we operate like on needing to profit for ourselves as well. Now for the other side, there's people like Isometric Studio. They did a really interesting article in AIGA about them, where they were talking about how their design studio, they like to try and take on clients that they think, you know, might be like, for example, homophobic, and try and point them in the right direction. So basically, like, you can instill into a bad company your own values, and you can make them better. That's kind of like the other side of things. And then there's also just like the whole thing of like, this is a capitalist system. There's, you know, like the large role of a graphic designer is to like contribute to consumerism. And basically, under this system, nothing is really ethical, so you could go that way as well. So it's like, why would I limit myself when it's like, even if I'm going for this great company, it's still trying to do the same kind of things that these other companies are trying to do. And then obviously, there's the other thing of like, being true to your ethics is kind of a privilege. You know, not everybody can be so like stingy about which places they want to work with, because we're all trying to make rent, and, you know, like, if you don't have like parents supporting you, or like, you know, like you're not independently wealthy or something, you need to be able to do that. So, you know, like, it's a fine line of like, what are your realities and what are your values, and how do those meet? So basically, all I'm encouraging you to do is look at your values, where you want your line to be, and I don't know, just apply that into the real world. Okay, so some other things you can do is, and like I said, this is mainly coming from the Conscious Creative book. So you can inform yourself. So I think ensuring that your ethics are founded in information and not ignorance is very important. Draw your line, that's another one. What will you do or what will you not do? I think that doing this ahead of time, before you get into a very gray area, it makes it easier for you to figure stuff out down the line. That doesn't mean that you have to say no to everything. That doesn't mean you have to say no when Amazon comes around and is like, hey, here's a bunch of money. Do something for me. It's really up to you and where your line is. If you are going to take a job that is kind of ethically gray or like maybe you don't agree with, I think the most important thing that you can do is to instill your values into a project. Now, obviously, this is kind of difficult if you're just like a junior designer or an intern or something like that, because you don't have much say on anything. But what you can do is, raise red flags of like when you see something, that maybe something's not going to be accessible, and it's just for purely aesthetics, and it's something that can be changed. Maybe raise like a red flag there. So, one thing that you can do after you've informed yourself about all this stuff is use your knowledge, and if you have different, obviously everybody has different privileges. If you have privilege, use that for good and use that to, make a project better. Just empower inclusivity, empower other voices that don't have that privilege. And basically, I think an important thing is to decentralize you in that process. Realize when you're not best fit for something, and when somebody else is probably the better choice and maybe more appropriate. Let's say, for example, it's something about women's issues. Maybe a woman should be doing it, and if you're a guy, like, empower women to do that. One thing you can do is pro bono work. That is a very helpful thing that you can do for organizations that don't normally have the money to do work for them for free. Now, I don't advocate for other forms of unpaid work, but I think this is a really great way to give back, and it is like a common thing that people do in the industry. And you can also, there are other ways to get paid in terms of like recognition, or they can give you other stuff. I don't know, stuff, whatever that place has to offer. That might not be cash. Another interesting thing is, I think a lot of people, they tell you to kind of separate personal, political, and professional lives. And I think that is honestly a form of people just trying to keep you oppressed so that you don't talk about this kind of stuff. So I think, if you can, in a professional way, don't separate the personal, don't separate the political, bring that into your work life and see how you can apply that there. Like, for example, like people, they tell you not to talk about money, but I think that is something that they tell people because they don't want you to be talking about with your colleagues about how maybe like a man is making a lot more than say myself, and is like how they keep you oppressed, basically. But basically everything I want you to take from this is really just go with your gut, do what you're comfortable with, and if you can't, don't beat yourself up for it, because we're all just trying to do our best. What I really just want people to do is just be as responsible as they can be, and just as thoughtful and mindful of the world around them as they can be. Now, getting into like, why would we do this anyway? I do think being a more responsible and a more mindful designer makes you a better designer. And I think it's better to assume that you have the power to enact change and enact harm than to assume that everything is like, just like you don't have that much impact. Because I do think graphic designers, they touch so many areas of the world that I do think we have an impact. And I do think that a lot of bad things in the world are kind of stem from graphic design, or at least have their graphic design's touch on it. And I think if that's the case, then we can change that for the better. And so why wouldn't we do that? Now, the why wouldn't we do that is because stuff costs money, and we do live in a capitalist society. Now getting into, capitalism. So basically, what does capitalism push? It basically pushes profit above all else. It pushes competition. It pushes, individualism. And I think that's very harmful, and I think we need to challenge that. It pushes consumerism, which is, as we know now, not good for the environment, and I don't think it's good for ourselves. And so I think that's something that, we need to challenge these systems in place. And who benefits from capitalism? It's historically rich, white, cis, het men. And other people, obviously, I am someone that benefits from that system. And looking to a new future, we shouldn't be looking at, how do we get up to that level of, the rich white man? We should be building new systems that basically lay new levels of equality and equity, rather than going to that level which oppresses other people. There is a very interesting place called the Design Justice Network, and they basically say that even just opting out of a bad client isn't necessarily enough. We need to be doing more, and we need to be critiquing the systems that we do operate in, and changing them, and changing the world around us. So the Design Justice Network principles, it's a living document of basically things you can check off that you are doing to ensure that you're challenging the systems in place. Let's get into it. So the first one, we use design to sustain, heal, and empower our communities, as well as to seek liberation from exploitative and oppressive systems. We center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of our design process. So this is an important one, because I think a lot of times we design for other designers, and we need to look at who exactly we're designing for. If we can consult with them, do that. I know a very big thing nowadays is co-design, and that's working more directly with your clients, working directly with people that will be affected by your design, and applying that to make better design. So we center, I already did that one. We prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. So this is an important thing that, you can mean well, but you can still do harm. And the impact that you have is more important than what you intended to do. And so, by following the other principles, you could probably mitigate the harm that you're doing, but you also need to pay attention to how you impact people, and then you can learn from that. We view change as emergent from an accountable, accessible, and collaborative process, rather than as a point at the end of process. So I think, we often, at the end of a project, you're just this is it, and you're done with it. But, it lives on with them. And we need to look at how we can constantly be growing, not just, in one project. We see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert. So, your schooling, your education, it doesn't necessarily teach you all the things to make you an expert in something, though, we might like to think that we are. And then this is kind of a similar thing, that we believe that everyone is an expert based on their own lived experience, and that we all have unique and brilliant contributions to bring to a design process. So basically, lived experience is really what gives someone expertise, because it's firsthand experience with something. And I think we really don't emphasize that enough, and we don't value that enough. And we really value like education. And I think I'll probably do another video about like whether or not school is worth it. Because I think that's a really big thing that people, wonder. We share design knowledge and tools with our communities. That is the big one for me. That's like why I am doing this video series in the first place. Because I have learned a lot from school and from independent research, and I just want to share these things and make it as accessible as possible. Because I know not everybody can afford to go to school, and a lot of people, they learn off of YouTube. So I wanted to share that. We work towards sustainable, community-led, and controlled outcomes. We work towards non-exploitative solutions that reconnect us to the earth and to each other. And before seeking new design solutions, we look for what is already working at the community level. We honor and uplift traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge and practices. That's a huge one, because I think, you're given a brief and you're like, okay, like, let's change everything. And it's like, sometimes what's traditional, what's already there, it might already be working. Okay, so that's about everything. Sorry if this wasn't super exciting. This kind of lays the groundwork for what I'm going to be doing on other videos. So it was unfortunately kind of necessary to go through all this basic kind of boring stuff in the first place. But what I will get into in future videos is stuff like sustainability in design, accessible, inclusive, universal design, decolonizing design, depatriotizing design, like making sure that we have equitable and inclusive gender and sexuality, which is a big problem in the design world. Stuff like that, like bad habits that we have in the design world that are not ethically great. And yeah, so look forward to that. Thank you so much for watching this video in the first place. And yeah, thanks, and catch you later.